I stood at the entrance of St. Mark's Church, the cold November air clinging to my black suit as I adjusted the simple ribbon on my lapel. The sky was overcast, a muted gray that seemed to weigh down the air, pressing every sound into a kind of reverent silence. It had been 15 years since I had set foot in my hometown, and now I was here for my father's funeral. I had rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times, picturing myself walking in with quiet dignity, paying my respects and leaving before old wounds could be reopened. But the moment I stepped through the heavy wooden doors, the soft murmur of conversation broke against my ears like an unexpected wave. I caught my sister Melissa's voice, sweet on the surface, but edged with that familiar blade of condescension that had once cut me so deeply. Poor Becky, she was saying, in a tone just low enough to pretend it was private. Heard she is broke and living off some veteran's pension. The words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were true, but because they were the same kind of casual cruelty that had driven me away all those years ago. Around her, a few cousins and distant relatives chuckled lightly the way people do when they think they are in on a harmless joke. My stomach tightened, but I kept my steps measured as I walked toward the pews. Years of military training had taught me control under pressure, to let emotion be a shadow that followed me instead of the weapon in my hand. I smiled faintly as I passed Melissa without looking directly at her. She had no idea. None of them did. They still pictured me as the rebellious 18-year-old who stormed out of the house with a duffel bag, disappearing into a life they assumed ended in failure. I slid into an empty seat near the middle, feeling the polished wood against my back, letting the whispers fade into the background noise of rustling hymn books and the distant creak of the organ pedals. My heart beat steady but strong. If they wanted to think I was nothing, I would let them for now. I glanced toward the altar where my father's framed photograph stood, surrounded by lilies, his uniform cap placed beside it. The man who had once been my silent witness, and sometimes my silent judge, was gone now. I had come to say goodbye, but I had also come for something else. They had no idea who I had become or what was about to happen in the next hour. I was Rebecca Hayes, the middle child who never fit the mold, the one who asked too many questions at the dinner table and learned too early that silence was the safer choice in our house. In Cedar Ridge, people spoke softly about family matters, but in our home, the quiet had a way of making every judgment louder. My brother Jake was the personification of everything my mother praised. He was broad-shouldered, charming when he wanted to be, and strong in a way that looked good in photographs. He had a job at a local construction firm that he liked to call executive level A, truck that gleamed in the driveway, and a habit of turning every gathering into a stage where he stood center and everyone else became scenery. He liked to joke that I was allergic to success, that I had chosen hard paths because I wanted attention. The way he said my name always made it sound smaller. Becky. Like I was still a kid who needed to be told where to stand. My sister Melissa had a talent for appearances. She could turn a casserole into a charity event and a simple dress into a statement. She married a man who worked in banking and learned to speak the language of foundation galas and weekend homes, mingling with people who praised her taste and never asked hard questions about substance. To my mother, Melissa was proof that a woman could be perfect if she was careful enough, agreeable enough, delicate enough. I had never been delicate and rarely agreeable. My father was a man of uniforms and rules, a veteran who believed order could hold a family together. He coached my softball team when I was 10 and taught me to stand with my feet planted when life shoved hard. He also taught me that a closed mouth kept peace. And so when voices rose in our house and I learned to measure the distance between anger and impact, he would sit in his chair and stare at the weather report on the television like it contained instructions for staying dry in a storm that was already inside the walls. The town saw us as normal. The church saw us as dedicated. People saw what we allowed them to see. In high school, Jake was the star who never had to try. He knew how to make teachers laugh, how to talk his way around deadlines, how to be the hero for neighbors when a tree branch fell or a fence needed mending. Melissa became the golden girl with perfect grades and photographs that looked like magazine pages. I learned to be invisible and found comfort in the school library where the sound of turning pages felt honest. At night, the house changed tone. Jake drank beer with friends behind the garage and came back louder than before. If I said no to lending him my cash from a weekend job, the air in the hallway grew heavy and dangerous. My mother would say, "Do not provoke him." My father would say, "This is not the time." I learned to pack my fear into a small box and slide it onto a shelf behind my ribs. Years later, the box still had weight. I enlisted at 18 because the recruiter spoke to me like I was capable, and because the idea of a structure that did not bend around one person felt like air after drowning. The Army gave me discipline and bruises and a sense of my own strength. It gave me a rank that no one could take away with a sneer. It also gave me a way to leave this town without apologizing. I wrote home at first letters that my mother displayed on the refrigerator like proof that I might still become the version of daughter she approved. When I requested military police training, she stopped mentioning me at church. Jake said I was trying to act tough. Melissa said it was a phase I would outgrow. I stopped explaining. Over time, the calls faded until holidays were just voicemails, and my father's voice sounded smaller each year. In the years since I built a life defined by clarity, I trusted people who earned it. I spoke when it mattered. I learned to keep my face calm even when my pulse surged, because control can be kindness when the room needs it. I also learned that family stories calcify when left unchallenged. In theirs, I was the runaway, the stubborn one, the girl who would come back when the world proved her wrong. They never asked who I had become. They decided. They spoke it into the air until it felt like truth. And now, at my father's funeral, they were still telling that story. They were still so sure. They did not know that certainty can shatter in a single hour when reality walks through the door and looks them in the eye. The memory that rose unbidden as I sat in the pew was from a night 20 years ago when the walls of our house seemed to close in and the line between family and enemy blurred beyond recognition. I was 18, just weeks from graduation, and had been working double shifts at the diner to save for my own car. The cash was in an envelope tucked inside a textbook in my room, my private little insurance policy for a life beyond Cedar Ridge. Jake had been drinking that night. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive and the slam of a truck door. His boots hit the porch heavy, his voice already raised about some guy at the bar who had looked at him wrong. I shut my bedroom door quietly, hoping the storm would pass me by. It didn't. The knock was hard and fast, and before I could answer, he shoved the door open so hard it rattled against the wall. He was smiling, but it was the wrong kind of smile. He asked for money, said he needed to cover something until payday. I told him I didn't have any to spare. His face changed, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "You holding out on me, Becky?" He stepped closer, and I felt the air shift, that prickle of instinct that says trouble is coming. I told him again no, and that was when his hand came down on my shoulder, hard enough to shove me back into the desk. My textbook fell open, and the envelope slipped out. His eyes locked on it. I moved fast, but he was faster. He snatched it up and laughed, waving it like a trophy. My mother's voice floated in from the hallway, thin and sharp. "Don't antagonize him, Rebecca. Just let it go." My father's chair creaked in the living room, the television murmuring about rain in the county. Neither of them came in. Neither of them stopped him. I remember the hot sting of humiliation more than the bruise on my arm. In that moment, something inside me decided this would be the last night I let anyone in this house have power over me. I waited until Jake left the screen door banging shut behind him, and then I pulled out my duffel bag. I packed the bare essentials, a change of clothes, my ID. The photograph of my father in uniform from before I was born. I didn't say goodbye. I walked to the edge of town and caught a ride with a trucker headed toward the next city. 2 weeks later, I was in a recruitment office signing papers that would send me to basic training. The Army was not easy. It broke me down to muscle and bone and rebuilt me into someone who could stand in a sandstorm without flinching. I learned discipline, the weight of responsibility, the trust between soldiers who know that hesitation can cost lives. I chose the military police track, drawn to the idea of protecting those who could not protect themselves, of stepping in where silence once reigned. Over the next 15 years, I served in active combat zones, trained with international forces, and earned the rank of captain. I learned to read a room in seconds, to measure threat levels, to move people to safety under pressure. I learned that respect earned in the field was different from respect at home. At home, they still saw me as the girl who left with nothing. I stopped trying to change their minds. Each year that passed, I built more distance, and in that distance, I built a career that was mine alone. I founded a private security training firm after leaving active duty, hiring veterans who needed purpose and steady work. We trained corporate teams, high-profile clients, and even diplomatic staff. Contracts were lucrative, but more than that, they were a way to take care of the people who had once had my back in the most dangerous places on earth. The company grew our reputation solid, our team tight-knit. I was proud of what we built, but I never called home to tell them. What would have been the point? They had never asked. They preferred their story of me as the drifter who probably scraped by on odd jobs. Let them have it. Until today, because today was different. Today I would see them all in the same room for the first time in over a decade, and they would see me. Not because I needed them to know, but because some truths deserve daylight after years in the dark. My father's death had brought me back here, but the reckoning would be mine to deliver. They thought they understood who I was. They thought they could still talk about me like I wasn't in the room. They didn't know the woman in uniform who had walked through deserts, faced armed insurgents, and stood her ground when it mattered most. They didn't know the captain who had built something powerful from the ruins they left me in. They would. And soon. The call had come a month ago, its tone as cold as the winter morning light streaming through my apartment windows in Arlington. I had been reviewing training schedules for a corporate client when my phone lit up with Melissa's name, a name I hadn't seen on my screen in years. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but answered out of curiosity. Her voice was clipped efficient, like she was checking an unpleasant task off her list. Dad passed away last night. The service is next month. You should come, if you can afford the trip. The pause she left before the last part was deliberate. A blade slipped between ribs with practiced ease. I sat in silence for a moment, letting the news settle. My father was gone. Whatever complicated love and resentment I carried for him would have no more chances to change shape. I asked about arrangements about how my mother was holding up. Melissa answered mechanically as though she were reading from a script. Jake's handling most of it. We'll see you there. The line went dead before I could respond. For the rest of the day, I moved through my work with a dull weight in my chest. Memories of my father in his younger days mingled with images of the man sitting silently in his recliner while storms raged through our home. Part of me didn't want to go back. I had built a life far from their control, a life defined by my own rules, not theirs. But another part, the part that had stood at attention for a flag-draped coffin more than once, understood that some farewells cannot be done from a distance. Attending the funeral was not about them. It was about closing a chapter I had left half-finished for 15 years. Still, I knew walking into that church would be like stepping onto a battlefield where the weapons were words and memories instead of rifles. I decided quickly that I would go, but I would go on my own terms. I would not announce my arrival or my success. I would let them see what they wanted to see until I decided the moment was right to change the picture entirely. In my line of work, timing was everything, and so was control of the environment. I would have both. Before I booked my flight, I made a different call to my head of operations, a former master sergeant named Cole, who had been with me since our first contract. I told him I might need a team in Cedar Ridge on standby. No overt presence, nothing that would draw attention unless I gave the signal. Understood, Captain, he said without hesitation. Whatever this was going to be, I would not be walking in alone even if they couldn't see the backup waiting just beyond the edge of their assumptions. Preparation began with subtraction. I opened my wardrobe and ignored the tailored suits and the watch that could pay a month of a mortgage in Cedar Ridge. I chose a plain black suit with softened seams from use a white shirt that did not gleam, and low heels that looked like they had walked miles because they had. I pulled my hair into a neat bun, nothing severe, nothing that announced rank. The ribbons and medals stayed in their velvet case. They had meaning for me, not for this audience. I moved through my apartment with a checklist that lived in my head the way muscle memory lives in the body. Phone charged, backup phone stored, discreet earpiece packed but not visible, simple leather wallet with a single credit card that did not hint at limits. I traded my usual travel case for an old carry-on with a scuffed corner. The point was to arrive as the person they expected to see. The point was to hold back the truth until the moment it would land with weight. I booked a standard commercial flight and a mid-size rental at the airport. No car service, no driver, no attention. Before I closed my laptop, I sent Cole a message with a time window and a map of the church, the cemetery, and my mother's house. Team positions would be quiet and flexible. 2 vehicles would stage 3 blocks from the church, another near the reception hall, a fourth outside my mother's neighborhood, behind the line of oaks that bordered the cul-de-sac. Cole replied with a simple copy. We had worked together long enough to understand that the simplest plans were often the strongest. If I texted now, he would bring the team forward to a visible point of entry. If I texted hold, he would keep them out of sight, but close enough to change the air in a room the moment they stepped through a door. I built an escalation ladder in my mind. Step 1, arrive alone and observe. Step 2, endure the first wave of small slights and gather the measure of the room. Step 3, redirect if needed with quiet authority. Step 4, signal the team if the family meeting moved from condescension to cornering. Step 5, use presence not volume to reset the order of things. This was not about spectacle for its own sake. It was about truth coming into focus when people were forced to see it standing right in front of them. I called the funeral director and confirmed the schedule, thanked him for keeping the service simple, and asked if there was a private room where family could gather after the hymn. He offered the side parlor. I made a mental note. The parlor would compress people into a smaller space where words carry farther. I printed copies of documents I might need if the conversation turned to my father's estate. Not to argue, to avoid letting anyone twist facts into favors. I placed the folder in the carry-on under a black scarf. I looked around my apartment one last time at the framed photograph of my unit on the console table and the small brass coin that had seen sand and rain and blood. I touched the coin for luck and for steadiness. This was not a return to the past. This was a controlled operation centered on closure. When I locked the door behind me, the hallway lights flickered with the hum of the building. The world outside felt ordinary in that way cities do when you are leaving for some place that will never be ordinary to you. In the rideshare to the airport, I rehearsed what I would not say. I would not justify my choices. I would not ask for acceptance. I would allow silence to do the work until it was time to change the room. And when that moment came, the plan would unfold with the precision I trusted more than luck. The rental car smelled faintly of coffee and vinyl, its engine hum steady, as I took the highway toward Cedar Ridge. The landscape shifted from city skylines to rolling fields broken by bare trees, the kind that looked skeletal in the winter light. My grip on the wheel stayed loose, but my eyes scanned the mirrors the way they always did, a habit from years of assessing threat before it had a name. When the town's welcome sign came into view, the letters a little faded from sun and time, something inside my chest tightened. Cedar Ridge looked the same as it had the day I left. The gas station still had the same dented ice chest outside. The diner where I had worked still leaned a little to one side, its window sign advertising the same Wednesday pie special. It was as though the years had passed around this place instead of through it. I pulled into the church lot 20 minutes before the service, parking near the edge where I could watch arrivals without being in the center of attention. People moved in small clusters, some in black coats, others in faded suits that spoke of long storage in the back of a closet. I spotted Jake first, standing with his back to the church doors, his voice carrying as he greeted people with a handshake that turned into a pat on the shoulder. He wore a dark suit that fit well enough, but the glint in his eyes was the same as when we were kids, part performance, part challenge. Melissa stood a few feet away in a fitted black dress, her blonde hair perfect despite the breeze. She had a way of holding herself that drew eyes, and she knew it. When her gaze landed on me, it was like watching someone scan a document for errors. Her smile came a second too late, her eyes cool as she stepped forward. "You made it," she said, as though my presence was a surprise rather than an expectation. "At least you're here." Jake and I handled the arrangements. It was a lot, but we managed. She glanced at my simple suit and the carry-on in my hand, her expression flickering with a kind of polite pity. "You staying long?" "Long enough." I said, my voice even. Jake approached, then his handshake firm but perfunctory. "Didn't know if you could get away from whatever it is you do now." His tone made it sound like whatever it was had little value. "We've been covering things here. Mom's been through enough." He looked me over like he was taking inventory. If you need a place, there's space at Mom's, or you can get a room at the inn if that's better for you. The implication was clear. I didn't belong in the center of this, not in their eyes. I let their words pass without response, storing the tone, the assumptions, the unspoken hierarchies. Inside the church smelled faintly of lilies and old hymnals. I found a seat a few rows back, the position giving me a clear view of both the casket at the front and the people who filed in. A few relatives nodded, others whispered to Melissa or Jake before glancing my way. Every movement, every look was a reminder of the story they still believed about me. They didn't know the story had changed. They didn't know the ending I had written for today. The reception after the service was held in the church's fellowship hall, a long room with folding tables covered in white cloths and an assortment of casseroles, pies, and sandwiches lined up at one end. People milled about in small knots, voices low, but carrying just enough for words to drift. I moved along the edges, listening more than speaking, watching the way Jake held court near the coffee urn, Melissa moving gracefully between conversations like a hostess at her own event. Every so often I caught snippets meant to be overheard. She's been gone so long I'm surprised she even knew when the service was. Army pensions aren't much, are they? Guess she didn't have anything else to do. My mother sat at a table near the front, a teacup in her hand, nodding as an older woman spoke about my father's kindness. When our eyes met, she smiled faintly and motioned me over. "Rebecca, dear, you look healthy," she said, as though searching for something more complimentary but unable to land on it. "Are you managing okay? If you ever need help with groceries or rent, you know you can ask." Her tone was gentle, but it carried the same assumption as Melissa's and Jake's, that my life was a fragile thing balanced on the edge of necessity. Before I could answer, Jake arrived holding a plate piled with food. "We should probably talk about the estate before everyone leaves," he said, glancing toward Melissa, who joined us with her own plate. "Dad didn't have much in liquid assets." Jake continued. "There's the land, but selling it might be the best option. The proceeds could go toward taking care of Mom, covering expenses she'll have now." Melissa nodded in agreement. "We can handle most of it. Of course you could contribute in other ways. Maybe help out with smaller expenses or visit more often to give us a break." She said it with a smile, but the shape of it was sharp. "We know you probably can't match our contributions," Jake added, "but whatever you can manage would be appreciated." He spoke as though granting me a concession. I kept my voice calm. "We can discuss it later," but they were not finished. "It's important we're realistic," Melissa said. "We don't want you stretching yourself thin. Stability matters." My mother sipped her tea, not meeting my eyes. The conversation turned to Melissa's recent vacation in Italy, to Jake's new truck, to the golf tournament Andrew had placed in last month. My presence was like a placeholder in their narrative, the character they believed had failed but was too stubborn to admit it. I let it play out, every comment another stitch in the fabric they had been weaving for years. They didn't realize the thread was about to snap. I looked at the clock on the far wall and calculated how long it would take for Cole's team to reposition from their current post to the parking lot. Timing was a skill I had learned in the field too early, and you risked losing the effect too late, and the momentum shifted. For now, I let them talk, nodding occasionally, the picture of polite endurance. They thought they knew exactly who I was. In less than an hour, they would be asking themselves how they had ever believed it. We moved from the fellowship hall to the side parlor, a smaller room with dark wood paneling and a long oval table. Jake took the seat at the head as if the choice was obvious. Melissa on his right, my mother on his left. I chose a chair halfway down the table, the position giving me a clear line of sight to everyone. A few extended relatives lingered near the doorway until Jake politely but firmly told them this was family business. He opened a manila folder, his tone shifting into the cadence of someone delivering a presentation. "Here's the situation," he began. "Dad's life insurance was minimal. The checking account has enough to cover immediate costs, but long-term, we need to make decisions. The land is the only significant asset. Selling it now would ensure Mom's needs are met for years." Melissa leaned forward, her hands clasped delicately. "We've already looked into a few buyers, people Jake knows through his work. It would be straightforward, no hassle." She glanced at me as if expecting me to nod in agreement. Jake continued. "Melissa and I are prepared to contribute to Mom's ongoing care. I can handle the bigger expenses through my bonuses, Melissa can cover travel and household help. That leaves some smaller costs, utilities, groceries, incidentals that you could take on. He looked at me with an expression that was part challenge, part pity. We know your situation is different. We don't expect you to match us. Even a few hundred a month would make a difference, Melissa added. Or, if that's too much, you could just visit more and help out physically. Time is as valuable as money after all. I let their assumptions hang in the air, the unspoken premise that my resources were limited, my capacity small. My mother finally spoke. It's about making sure everyone does their part, she said gently. We all want what's best for the family. I kept my hands folded on the table, my voice neutral. You've clearly put thought into this. Jake nodded clearly, pleased with his own organization. We have. And to be fair, we want this to be equitable. We know what we can handle. Now we just need to know what you can commit to. Melissa smiled, a carefully constructed thing. So, what do you think? The room was quiet enough that I could hear the faint hum of the old radiator. In that pause, I could feel every year of silence between us, every assumption they had reinforced to each other until it became unshakable in their minds. They believed I had been surviving at the margins, drifting from one unstable situation to another. They believed I was someone they could safely sideline in decisions. They were wrong. I looked down briefly as if considering their request, then reached for my phone. I need to make a quick call before I answer, I said, standing. Jake frowned. We're in the middle of something important. I stepped toward the doorway anyway and dialed. Cole, I said when he picked up. Move the team to the front. 10 minutes. His acknowledgement was crisp. I hung up and returned to my seat, noting the curious glances from around the table. Just confirming my transportation, I said lightly. Jake raised an eyebrow. Taxi? I smiled. Not exactly. I settled back, calm and steady. The operation had just moved to its next phase. The next 10 minutes stretched with deliberate slowness, each tick of the clock. A reminder that control belonged to the one who could wait. Jake resumed talking about the land and the supposed urgency of selling Melissa, nodding along, my mother occasionally interjecting with small agreements. I responded minimally, letting their confidence build because when the reversal came, it would cut deeper. The low thrum reached my ears before it reached theirs, a sound I knew as well as my own breathing. Years in the military had trained me to pick out the distinctive note of an approaching convoy vehicle, the way the air shifts when engines with real weight move closer. Jake kept speaking until the sound grew undeniable. His words faltered. Melissa's brow creased. My mother tilted her head slightly as though trying to place the source. Then, through the tall windows, movement 2 black SUVs rolling into the lot in a staggered formation, followed by a third pulling up to the curb. The vehicles stopped in unison, doors opening with precision. 6 men stepped out, each in a black suit and sunglasses. Their movements coordinated, their expressions unreadable. The lead, Cole, scanned the perimeter before opening the rear door of the first SUV. The rest fanned out, one taking position near the church entrance, 2 more at the edge of the lot. The chatter in the parlor stopped entirely. What on earth is this? Melissa asked, her voice pitched higher than before. Jake pushed back his chair and stood his stance somewhere between defensive and disbelieving. My mother's eyes widened, her teacup trembling slightly in her hands. I rose slowly, the same measured movement I had used in briefing rooms before delivering news that would change the course of an operation. My ride is here, I said evenly. The words landed in the silence like a controlled detonation. Jake blinked at me. Ride for what? Cole appeared in the doorway, his voice professional and carrying just enough to fill the room. Perimeter secure, Captain Hayes. Vehicles are ready when you are. Every head turned toward me. The title was unmistakable. Captain. The shift in the room was physical. It was in the way Melissa's shoulders pulled back, in the way Jake's jaw tightened, in the way my mother's breath caught. Captain, Melissa repeated as though testing the word. I met her eyes. Military police. 15 years. Now CEO of a private security training firm. Those men outside former service members I've worked with across multiple operations. They are my team. Jake's face flushed. You brought bodyguards to a funeral. I brought my colleagues, I corrected. Men I trust to stand where they're needed. I picked up the folder I had packed days ago and tucked it under my arm. And right now, there needed to make sure the next part of this conversation happens without the usual interruptions. I walked past Jake toward the doorway, Cole stepping aside to let me through. The others followed in a quiet, practiced formation that filled the space without crowding it. Outside, the winter light caught on the polished black of the SUVs, the reflection throwing a sharp gleam across the lot. A few guests lingering near the entrance stepped back instinctively as we passed. I opened the rear door of the lead vehicle and looked back toward the parlor where they still sat caught between indignation and shock. "We're not finished," I told them, "but I think the next conversation will be at my place." I slid into the SUV, Cole closing the door behind me. The engine's low growl rose as the convoy pulled away, the church shrinking in the rear window. Inside the vehicle, I allowed myself a single, slow breath. This was not about showing off. This was about reestablishing truth in a space where it had been buried for decades. In 15 minutes, they would be standing in a place that contradicted every story they'd told about me, and I would be the one guiding them through it. The drive to my property took just under 15 minutes, the convoy moving with the smooth precision that came from years of shared drills and field work. Through the tinted windows, I watched the scenery change from the familiar grid of Cedar Ridge to the open stretch of County Road, then to the private lane lined with tall pines that shielded the estate from the outside world. The gate came into view, wrought iron with discreet security cameras tracking our approach. Cole spoke into his mic, the gates swinging open in sync with our arrival. Beyond them, the main house rose from the center of the grounds, its stone facade solid against the winter sky. A wide drive curved toward the entrance, the landscaping manicured but not ostentatious, the kind of order that comes from discipline rather than vanity. As the SUVs rolled to a stop, I could see their faces through the rear window of the trailing vehicle. Melissa's mouth was slightly open, her gaze darting from the house to the grounds. Jake's brow was furrowed suspicion fighting with disbelief. My mother sat rigid, clutching her purse like an anchor. The team exited first, forming a quiet perimeter as I stepped out and walked to the main entrance. I paused at the threshold, giving them a moment to take in the scope of what they were seeing, the expanse of lawn, the reflection of the house and the pond beyond the discreet helipad visible near the tree line. Cole gestured for them to follow me inside. The foyer opened into a space with high ceilings and a staircase that curved toward the upper floor. Light spilled through tall windows, catching on the polished wood and the framed photographs along the walls, images of my units in the field, training exercises, ceremonies. "Welcome to my home," I said simply, my voice steady. My mother's eyes moved slowly around the room before settling on me. This is yours," I nodded. "Acquired it 5 years ago. It's both residence and operations hub for my company." Jake's voice came out flat. What company? I led them into the living room where the windows framed a view of the back gardens and the training facility beyond. "Hayes Tactical Solutions. We train corporate government and diplomatic clients in security and risk management. 15 years in the field taught me the importance of preparation. Now I teach others how to achieve it." Melissa sank into one of the chairs, still scanning the room as if looking for proof that it wasn't real. My mother sat slowly, her hand still on her purse. Jake remained standing, his posture tight. I set the folder on the table between us. "Inside is everything related to Dad's estate, including the land you were so eager to sell. I've already taken care of the taxes and maintenance. I've also secured it under a trust in his name, which will fund a veterans support center there. The sale you were discussing is not going to happen." Jake's eyes narrowed. "And you just decided this on your own." "I decided it because I have the means and the vision to see it through. And because Dad served, that land deserves a purpose worthy of his name." I let the words hang for a moment, the silence thick. "You assumed I had nothing to offer. That's the story you've told yourselves for years. You never asked who I became. You never wanted to know. But now you do." For a long moment, no one spoke, the only sound in the room, the faint hum of the heating system cycling on. Melissa's eyes flicked to Jake, searching for a lead, but his jaw was locked tight, the muscle in his cheek twitching. My mother looked down at her hands as if the lines on her skin might give her a way to understand what she was seeing. Finally, Jake broke the silence, his voice edged with something between disbelief and anger. You could have told us. All these years you let us believe you were scraping by. Do you have any idea how foolish that makes us look? I met his gaze evenly. I didn't create your assumptions, Jake. You did that yourselves. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you dismissed it as a hobby or changed the subject. You preferred your version of me because it made you comfortable. Melissa leaned forward, her tone defensive. We were trying to help. That's why I offered you that gift card last Christmas. I thought you needed it. I let a hint of steel into my voice. No, Melissa. That wasn't help. That was a reminder of the box you decided I belonged in. You never once asked if I was okay or what my life was really like. You just reinforced the same story over and over. My mother finally looked up, her eyes wet. We didn't mean to make you feel small. I nodded slightly. Perhaps not intentionally, but intention doesn't erase impact. The truth is, I left because of the violence in this family, because the people who should have protected me didn't. I built my life without you, and I succeeded not because of your support, but in spite of your silence. Jake's face flushed. You're exaggerating. That was years ago. I kept my voice low, but unyielding. Yes, it was years ago, and the memory is still sharp. The night you took the money I saved to leave, the night Mom told me not to provoke you while Dad stared at the TV. I swore I would never give you that power again. And I haven't. The air in the room seemed to shift then, as if some of the weight had moved from my shoulders to theirs. Melissa sat back, her expression uncertain. My mother's tears slipped over her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. I reached for the folder again, opening it to reveal the documents inside. The Trust for Dad's Land is fully funded. The Veterans Center will be operational within 18 months. I've already coordinated with state agencies and veteran organizations to make it happen. This isn't a discussion, it's a done deal. I looked directly at Jake. You don't have to approve it. You just have to understand that it's happening. He looked like he wanted to argue, but whatever words he was reaching for died on his tongue. I leaned back, letting the silence speak for me. For years, they had controlled the narrative of who I was. Today, I had taken it back, and from the look in their eyes, they finally knew it. No one moved for several seconds after I finished speaking, as though the weight of my words had pinned them to their seats. My mother's gaze shifted to the window, where the late afternoon light stretched long across the gardens, her voice quiet when she finally spoke. I didn't realize how much you'd built, Rebecca. I didn't realize how much I'd missed. There was something in her tone that made me pause. Regret, but also the awareness that some distances can't be crossed in a single step. Melissa broke the moment with a small, almost hesitant question. Can I see the plans for the center? Her voice had lost its earlier edge. I slid one of the packets across the table toward her. It will offer transitional housing job training and counseling for veterans. There's nothing like it within 100 miles. Dad's name will be on the front entrance. She traced her fingers lightly over the printed diagrams as if picturing it. It's actually a good idea, she admitted, and for the first time in years, the compliment sounded genuine. Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression still guarded but less combative. I guess I underestimated you, he said finally. I let out a small breath. For a long time, I let that happen because it was easier than forcing you to see the truth. But things are going to be different now. If we're going to talk about family decisions, I'll be part of them as an equal. My mother nodded slowly, a sign she understood, even if she wasn't ready to say so aloud. I closed the folder and set it aside. The cars will take you back whenever you're ready, but you're welcome to stay for dinner. My chef has prepared a meal in the dining room. The invitation hung there a test of whether they were willing to step into this new reality. Melissa was the first to nod. I'll stay. Jake hesitated, then gave a short nod of his own. My mother murmured her agreement. We moved into the dining room where the table was set with simple elegance, nothing ostentatious, just to the kind of order and care I valued. The meal began in awkward silence, but slowly. Questions replaced judgment. Melissa asked about my deployments. My mother wanted to know about the company. Even Jake, between bites, asked how I had managed to transition from military service to business ownership. I answered honestly, but without embellishment, letting the facts speak. For the first time in years, the conversation didn't feel like a battle to defend my worth. As dessert was served, I realized something had shifted, not complete reconciliation, but the first cracks in the walls that had kept us apart. This was still my family, flawed and often blind, but for the first time, they were looking at me without the old filter. They might never fully understand the years I spent away, but they could no longer deny who I had become, and that was enough for now. After dinner, I suggested we take coffee in the library, a room lined with shelves of books collected from years of travel and service. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm light over the leather chairs and polished wood. My mother sat nearest the fire, her hands cupped around the mug as if absorbing its heat. Melissa wandered to the shelves, scanning titles that ranged from military history to leadership strategy to travel memoirs. Jake stood near the window, looking out at the dark expanse of lawn, where two of my team still patrolled in the distance. I set my cup down and spoke evenly. I want to be clear about something. This isn't about showing off. Today was about establishing a truth that's been buried for too long. I'm not the person you decided I was years ago. I've built a life on my own terms, and I'm not stepping back into the role you assigned me. My mother's eyes lifted to mine steady for the first time all day. I hear you, she said simply. Melissa returned to the table and took a seat. I'd like to be involved in the Veterans Center, she said, surprising me. Not in the way we used to do things, but actually helping. Fundraising events, whatever you need. I studied her for a moment, measuring the sincerity in her tone, then nodded. We can talk about that. It would have to be real work, not just photo ops. She gave a small smile. Understood. Jake turned from the window, his expression unreadable. I can't change the past. I won't pretend I didn't say or do things I shouldn't have. But I can acknowledge you've done something I didn't think was possible. Maybe I was wrong about what success looks like. The words didn't erase years of damage, but they were a start. I stood, signaling that the evening was winding down. The cars will take you back to Mom's. You're welcome here anytime, but understand this respect is the price of admission. They didn't argue. As they left, escorted by my team, I walked to the terrace and watched the taillights disappear down the drive. The night air was cold but clear, the stars sharp above the dark line of the pines. For years, I had built walls to keep this family at a safe distance, believing that distance was the only way to protect myself. Today, I had stepped out from behind those walls not to seek approval, but to claim my ground. They had seen me now, truly seen me, and there was no returning to the old story. The measure of victory wasn't in their shock or even their grudging respect. It was in knowing that I could be fully myself in their presence without shrinking. That was the freedom I had fought for in uniform and out of it, and as I turned back into the warm light of my home, I knew I would never give it up again.